How do you answer questions about research in the medical job interview? Let's talk about it in this next video. Hello there, Dr. Anthony Llewellyn. I'm here to help you manage your medical career, whether you're watching me on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Welcome. So today we're going to talk about deconstructing interview questions, and specifically questions about research. So this question was generated by one of the doctors who is in my interview skills course that you can do online. And the question from Varsha was about interview questions. So one of the values about my course is that you can actually ask questions about specific questions that come up in the interview. So while applying for RMO jobs, I was once asked to describe a journal article I read changed the way that I practice medicine. I was quite stumped when I was asked this question. Please guide me on how I could have answered this. Thank you. So I'm really glad that you sent in this query, Varsha, because this question is actually one that I specifically practice quite a bit with candidates who we might be doing the interview skills coaching for, because it does come up a lot, particularly if there's a selection criteria about research. This is a very clever way of asking about your integration of research. So what we're going to do in today's video is we're going to talk about why this question might be asked about research, how to go about answering the question, including how you might use a framework that will help you in this sort of tricky scenario. And I'll give you an example where I'll use an example from my own practice, just to sort of bring it home for you. Before we do that, knowledge check. So to successfully interview for a medical job, of course, we firstly need some experience. You need the experience in medicine, particularly for jobs above internship, so that you can develop competencies and achievements that you can use when you're going for your next job interview. We also need to understand the job we're applying for. In particular, we need to understand the job description, and in particular in that job description, what the selection criteria are for the job. And that then helps us to relate how our achievements today, our successes, our competencies align with the new job, so that we can give information to the interview panel about how it is that you meet those criteria. So that's key vital information that you need to understand. Now, that might seem quite simple to some of you, but it's important to understand that there is a job description and there are selection criteria, and this can give you a helpful guidance as to what might come up in the interview. So you're less stumped. This is one of my best pieces of advice. Go through the selection criteria and think about how those selection criteria might be turned into questions. So let's take a selection criteria that might encompass research. So here's one that I have seen a few times. So let's say it's a resident medical officer position, and the selection criteria is demonstrating commitment to self-learning, professional development, and using research to drive improvements in patient-centered care. You know, that's a fairly common type of selection criteria. In my experience for trainee doctors, they don't often put criteria about research capability in there unless they're talking about how it relates to clinical care. So you can see that this might be the selection criteria that the job that Varsha was going for. So how does that then turn into a question about an example of a research paper that you put into practice? Well, the thing about selection and interviews is that the best predictor, or one of the best predictors of future behaviour, is past behaviour. So that's why selection panels are fans of asking questions where you're asked to provide an example from your past work, because it does relate into the future. And this is what we call a past behavioural question. And pretty much every interview will have at least one of these. And it's often the esoteric selection criteria like research that are the ones where they choose to do this to you. So the other thing is, I think this question is a little bit of a trap. It's a trap to see whether you read research, because if you can't think of an example, and maybe this is the full part of the test even, you can't think of an example of a research paper or a piece of research that you read that changed your approach, that's probably giving a strong signal away. So if there are questions about research, if there are selection criteria about research, please be sure to have some examples of how you've been involved in research, if that's what the criteria is about, or more relevantly, mostly for most jobs, an example of how you used research in your practice. So how do we go about answering it? Well, a reminder, the STAR technique. This is the HR technique for past behavioural questions. Situation, what were you doing? Actions, what you did. Task, your role and responsibilities. Results, what did you achieve? So this is how they often design the question marking framework for a past behavioural question. And this is my recommended approach for answering. Now, if you do the interview skills course, I give you some more advanced techniques, but let's just stick with STAR for now. So situation, task, actions, results. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about then. So in my recent practice in psychiatry, I was reviewing a man who was suffering from depression, and he'd had trouble with antidepressant medications because he's got an eye condition as well. And it seems like the antidepressants were creating problems with the artificial lens that he had. So this triggered something for me, because in the peer review group that I'm in, a few months ago we talked about whether there was an issue around antidepressant medications and increased intraocular pressure, that's increased eyeball pressure. And so, in fact, there was some evidence around it, and one of my peer review group members circulated a paper which was looking at a geriatric population, an older population, and the sort of incidence rates for increased intraocular pressure or increased eyeball pressure with various antidepressants. And so we put that in our shared folder for our peer review group, because that's what we do. So this activity around peer review group actually helped me in this particular scenario, because whilst this was a younger man, it gave me something to go on and to look at and to make a decision, and to give a bit more confidence in terms of my explanation as to why the antidepressant might be creating a problem and which one might be the best to go with, given that we're thinking of doing a new one, and what we should do if we encounter problems with the new medication. So my situation there was that I regularly participate in a peer review group process where we discuss research and relevant clinical scenarios. And my task was reviewing medication side effects for a patient, particularly around antidepressants. My actions were to reflect on this review article and to use that in terms of helping me and helping the patient make a decision about the next best antidepressant to trial, and what to do and how to monitor to see if there are any problems, and to also advise the general practitioner about other options. And so the result was I was able to give a much more confident and evidence-informed plan. So you can see there, situation, task, action, result. And the result caps off and shows, also demonstrates that I was using evidence in practice, which is what the whole scenario was about. So finally, just a few tips and tricks, a hack that you can use more generally to avoid being unprepared in the interview situation. So as I said, it's important to actually review the job description. That's your first step. The second step is to find the selection criteria in the job description. They're usually towards the end somewhere, and they're usually fairly well highlighted. And the third step is to come up with an example that meets each of the selection criteria. And that way you're much less likely to be stumped, in my experience, when it comes to the actual job interview. And if you want to go further, your next steps would be to check out the Advanced Med Doctor Job Interview Skills course, where you can get a whole lot of comprehensive information and other tips and techniques, all the things that I use in my coaching, including advanced techniques around the STAR framework to really make your example shine. And I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.